I just finished having a dinner party with Dara and Josh and George. We had some pasta and some bruschetta that Dara made, and it was really good. And we drank lots of bottles of wine and talked about romance. I've finished a couple of days of coursework in Cal Western's Chile summer program. And this is a cliche, but I have all of these questions, and I've tried to research some of them and figure out what the specific answers are, but I don't know that there are any. Like in our introduction to Chileno legal culture, we're talking about how an absence of an adversarial judicial system has inhibited economic development. And I have some difficulty with that statement because economic development is equated with capitalist economic development. I do agree that an adversarial judicial system can provide more access to, say, marginalized groups, but it can also be just as inaccessible as an inquisitorial system. So my thinking is that there's some other element to how the judiciary and the institutions in a government work that that determines whether people have access or do not have access. So finding out what that is what really interests me. And maybe a part of it is due process, maybe a part of it is the adversarial system, but I can't help but think that there's something more. Maybe you need some context. The Chile Summer Program is run by Jamie Cooper from Cal Western in San Diego, a law school, and he is part of advising the Chileno government, as I understand it, in transitioning or having transitioned from an inquisitorial judicial system, which is a system where the judge looks at a case, doesn't necessarily maintain a very robust public record, rules on the case without arguments from counsel, and effectively lays down a ruling without discourse. And this runs against the grain of lots of the thinkers in the West, because we're so attached to the Socratic method, the idea that a dialogue leads us to truth, and that two qualified contenders advocating antithetical positions will lead to a better understanding of what actually went down. And so I think part of that is true. But being from the United States, where we have an adversarial judicial system, I know that there are other things inside the judiciary that function to exclude people that are poor, people that are marginalized, like fees, like an inaccessible language, like unpredictability. And under the inquisitory Chileno system, they use a Napoleonic code, and so it's a code system. So I've heard people talk about it like it's a slot machine of the law, and you can apply a fact pattern, or you can take a fact pattern and apply a code to it and get a result, and that's what judges have done. That's highly predictable, I think, right? If you know how to apply the correct code to the right fact pattern, you know what's going to happen. You know how the judge is going to rule. And so, in terms of economic development, like we were talking about before, it seems like investors should be able to rely on an outcome. But it hasn't really been figured that way because it's not familiar. Because the mode of determining the truth of a matter is not familiar to the West, familiar to those who hold transnational capital, those who are interested in investing in, say, a Latin American country like Chile. And the reason that this gives rise to questions for me is that some of us have been saying that the lack of an adversarial judicial system has led to less capitalist investment, and that has meant less economic growth. I think that if you take that statement and you isolate it from the context, then it means that a non-adversarial judicial system necessarily means no economic growth. And I don't think that's true. I think that what's really going on is that cultural difference between economic machines will hinder their interaction, and that one system is not necessarily objectively more economically efficient than another, if that makes any sense. And I also resist the idea of promoting the efficient investment of capital in an economy means economic growth. I mean, it may not comport with the goals of the nation or of the people for there to be capitalist investment from the outside. So if the system of the judiciary and other institutions don't promote external investment of capital, and they only grow and maintain ownership of the means of production on the inside, and by people that live in the nation, I mean, that is a mode of growth. And it may be slower than if you had someone from the outside with more capital making factories appear, but though it's slower, it's more stable for the people who live in the given nation. So I'm curious about Lagos and his policy, how he was able to decrease poverty, and how there's still more to be done for Bachelet, who's currently in power. I often think that we talk about how impoverished people are in other nations, and we forget that in the United States we have varios, we have projects, we have the third world inside our own borders, and I think that it's a product of very similar economic models as the ones that are implemented in our spheres of influence inside our client states. It's the same hierarchies, and I think of it as the same global elite. So I'm I'm beset with a cliche. I mean, I've been reading about the Chileno Judiciary and about social change, and thinking about whether social change follows the law or whether the law responds to the desires for social change of the people. And I think that it's the latter.